they are, and it even pays lip service to a woman's right and female empowerment. And that's what my biggest issue with this has been.
By taking an element from, a tribal headdress and putting it in your fashion show, there's an element of exotification that goes, like, if you're thinking of somebody's cultural regalia as a costume piece, you are automatically othering that person. You're being
Right.
like, oh, look, this makes it exotic, even though it's, exotic is like the way that you make somebody different from the
Yeah, I
mainstream.
mean, you can otherize people and think that you're like doing a good thing, like, oh, but we're like finding them sexy, but it's not. And what's even worse is Native American women are not even afforded the right to be offended by this. If Native American women get offended by this and say, hey, you know, we're being murdered, we're being like sexually abused, and they're like, that was in the past, get over
Oh,
it.
right.
Or they
Yeah.
don't listen to our voices,
Mm-hmm.
or they say that they're honoring us and that we just aren't maybe smart enough to understand that they're honoring us,
Yeah,
or
good
that it's
point.
just in fun and it's a form of entertainment. But what it
Right.
comes down to is it's a source of profit. And
Mm-hmm.
when you see that flipped and Native American people are allowed to style themselves, we add more to our traditional looks because we're repainting the world to look the way that we want to see it. And we do it
Mm-hmm.
unapologetically with like fashions that aren't oppressive and damaging to our own communities.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like along with the whole idea of like using regalia as costume pieces and using that as a form of erasure, like there's this way that the fashion industry and like every other industry too, if we're dealing with, quote unquote Native American culture, there's this like snapshot image that these industries and people are working with that is literally from like 150 years ago.
They're looking at Native American styles like out of time and out of place, and they're placing meaning upon it for us without acknowledging that we had changing fashions and trends long
Right.
before America was colonized. People seem not to like they don't seem to understand that natives were fashionable, and even our regalia that we used in ceremony and for different like events was fashion. It's our creations that represent our people and ourselves. So, I mean,
Yeah.
when
And
you
that,
take it out of place and you only look at like something from like these 15-year periods in the 1800s or something and be like,
yeah.
that's what Native Americans wear.
Right.
That's
And
what
that's what
real
they
Native
always
Americans wear.
wore forever. And if you see
Yeah,
someone who says that they're Native American, but they're not wearing that, they're not really Native American.
right, exactly.
So it's like you are essentially just erased from
Yep.
every conversation about that because you don't look the way that the fashion industry and other industries have taught us that that's what a Native American looks like.
Yeah,
It's like it's very, very real and very clear erasure from where I'm standing,
absolutely.
which then allows that look to be exoticized and hypersexualized because, well, look, there's no one here to speak up against it. It's not like we could possibly be doing anything wrong. It's based on history.
And
Um,
natives are like, we're right here, we're speaking up. And they're like, see, there is no one.
right, exactly. So, did you hear something? Nope. Silence.
The thing, like, what that is it's imperialist nostalgia. And
Mm-hmm.
it's basically kind of interesting to see new information coming right now about not only Native American history, but just, I mean, not Native American fashion, but fashion throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because until recently, academics as a group have not taken fashion at all seriously for anyone because they couldn't
Oh.
possibly be bothered with trivial and superficial, unworthy matters such as clothing and footwear and hairstyles.
Which is very silly. Like that is, like you said before, just as much a form of expression as like fine art ever was.
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, like people have fashion within their art. Like even to this day, like you can like walk through like art shows and see like that people are dressed up in a part of the exhibit.
Yeah.
So, I
Yeah,
mean,
and
it's
like
been used.
in a lot of ways, fashion, this is possibly the way that I could answer what we opened this episode with is like, what do we think of fashion as? Like, what is it to us? Fashion is very much where art meets utility. Like, fashion
Yeah,
is a part of everyday life in a way that many other forms of art just aren't.
right.
And
And for Native Americans, like that art and utility came together like all the time with
Mhm.
our like weaponry and with our um the way that we use the different parts of the animal, like to make tools and stuff, would all be like decorated. And like even like in other cultures throughout history, they would um decorate like different things like that would be just a tool otherwise, but the
Right.
tool then becomes both an art and a tool. That's what fashion is to me. It's
Yeah.
an art and a tool.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah.
All right. Well, we did it, everyone.
That's
No.
it. We solved all the problems. Um, no, so I now that I'm looking at my notes, I have a link to where I found these quotes, but I don't have it in the notes who wrote them. So I will try to
Okay.
put that in the show notes later. But I found some interesting quotes about how the fashion industry has always acted as a colonializing force since it really became an industry in like Western developed nations from a long time ago. And one of these is, quote, the stigmatized ideas of the other are remains of Western imperialist rationale when colonized societies and cultures were defined as traditional, i.e., unchanging, authentic, i.e., geographically isolated, and ancestral, historically disconnected, to emphasize their difference from European society and culture, which was believed to be modern and cosmopolitan. And this is a means to justify oppressive and abusive colonial politics. And I thought that the points being made there about how like the other that we then get to use as costume pieces is unchanging, geographically isolated, and historically disconnected. So it like whatever the idea that we have of this other culture, whether it is a Native American culture or whether it's, like 19th
Gender.
century Chinese culture, like we have these frozen images in our mind that's what those people looked like. They don't look like that anymore because they're just invisible to us now. And that they always looked that way. It is very much the culture of the dominant force here saying, well, our fashion does change and move forward, and we are the ones who get to decide what's good and what's not. But that other culture over there that is extinct or, so impossibly far removed from us that we can't even consider them as having fashions and trends. Like, we're so very different.
Yeah, I do have a good example of this in like overall history. There's the skirt or the dress.
Oh,
Yeah. So TikTok has like everyone knows who TikTok is. Like I hope that everyone listening to this knows what TikTok is. It's a social media app.
Look it up.
And yeah. If you're gonna listen to this podcast, you're gonna need to know what TikTok is. No, just
We
kidding.
watch a lot of TikTok. It's true.
But TikTok has actually made like extreme changes to like all fashion. Like fashion and TikTok are like a huge thing. They've had like fashion inclusivity and cultural dress appreciation, not appropriation, because that gets called out there.
Yeah.
And it gets called out fairly quickly. And so one of the things, and one of my favorite things to see on there is the TikTok trend of men wearing dresses and skirts and chopping wood.
Oh, I haven't seen this, but I would like to.
Ooh, yeah. Okay, so chopping wood, the manliest act, it turns out, is not hindered at all by wearing a dress. And so basically, like, yeah, somebody had said something about like men real men don't wear dresses or real men don't wear skirts or something like that. And the next thing we knew, like all of these real men, these people who like were like, okay, well, I'm a real man, I think, I
Okay.
chop wood.
Yeah.
And they would like put on dresses and skirts. And basically bringing it down to everyone can wear skirts and dresses because style can be for everyone if gatekeepers would just stop trying to uphold those negative values of
Yeah.
and I'm rambling through this because we say this all the time, uphold all of those negative values in society where we're always talking about like
Yeah.
Anyway, people telling men that they can't wear, or people what they should and shouldn't wear. And so men's skirts have recently gotten like a lot of mainstream like resistance, but also like attention.
Yeah.
And it's based on the idea that since the skirt is inherently feminine, men wearing one is either feminine and therefore weakened.
Right.
Harkening back to like the sophisticated past where skirts are entirely feminine.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like Western centered because several cultures from India to Japan to Southwest Asia wore skirts and robes and things that would be considered dresses.
Even those Romans that we, based so much of our culture on, they wore what we would now consider dresses.
Absolutely. And it was completely acceptable for adult men to wear. Even today, we have like Jaden Smith and other famous people like all over.
Billy Porter. Oh, yeah. God, Billy Porter's red carpet outfits are one of the things that I have missed most during COVID.
Yeah.
He still goes on his social media sometimes in fabulous outfits, but they're not as elaborate. So
yeah, and what it comes down to is like it's not gendered and it's causing gender divisiveness in clothing.
Right.
And so these people who are doing this, they're not avant-garde. They're just advocating that we understand our ideas about clothing and how it's tied to culture and how it's tied to like social standards and class and gender.
Right. Yeah.
But it turns out that skirts and dresses can't possess an innate quality like femininity.
Yeah.
It's still a hard word for me to say.
Femininity. But like it's such a strange thing how I was going to say how like we have thought for so long that certain things represent masculinity and femininity specifically when it comes to fashion. But that may be more like it may not be that long of an experience like for that much of the world that like women wear dresses and men wear pants because that is always changing. But it does like it has been a long time that dresses are for women, and yet at the same time like women are now allowed to wear things besides dresses and skirts, but it is only a very, very, very new widespread phenomenon that men are starting to say, hey, we can wear skirts too. And I found...
I mean, it's new again, we should say, because it's new again, but it wasn't, there's like this weird time of gatekeeping in Euro-Western and Western American like thinking.
I have this very vague idea that makes me wonder how much the idea that women are the only ones who wear skirts may have been pushed forward and lasted longer because the English really hate the Scottish. like maybe the whole dresses versus trousers thing would have been gone longer ago if Scottish men didn't wear kilts. Like they really hate each other. So
you just reminded me of a joke that I thought of where what if I got to play basketball with Prince? Like would it be shirts versus blouses? I mean, but when it comes down to it, that joke is also about like fashion. Like I mean, it's about sports. We talked about sports on this, so we're done with that. That's been covered. We talked about basketball and shirts, but
I did a very, very shallow dive into looking at like why blue for boys and pink for girls, because this certainly doesn't apply only to fashion, but I feel like when it comes to babies particularly, everything is pink and